They said I was invisible. They meant it as a truth, not an insult. But the truth, sometimes it's a blade. I gave them everything. Every sacrifice, every late night. I built this life for them. And one day, I walked into my own house, and the laughter stopped. Not because they saw me, but because they did it. My brother, my own wife, they were discussing the future. A future where my absence was a certainty, where I was the problem being solved. I heard the word redundant, and suddenly, the chill wasn't from the air. It was the icy spike of betrayal driven right through my chest. What do you do when the people you love most start drawing up plans for your life without you in it? My name is Mark. For 20 years, I was the rock of the family, the provider, the one who fixed the broken pipes and the broken dreams. We had the perfect house, the perfect life, or so I thought. My younger brother Ethan lived with us. He was supposed to be temporary, a helping hand. Now, he's a shadow, growing larger every day. If this story touches your soul, subscribe this channel because every day there is a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you are listening from. The first time I felt it, truly felt the cold shoulder, was at my son's graduation. It was my proudest day. I went to hug him, and my wife, Sarah, gently stepped in front of me, pulling Ethan into the embrace instead. Ethan helped him study so much, didn't you, sweetie? She cooed. My son didn't even meet my eye. I had paid for the tutors, the university, the cap and gown. I was standing right there. That night, it got worse. Sarah sat me down at the kitchen table. The atmosphere was formal, like a board meeting. She told me, Mark, we've been talking about the house, the business. Honestly, your role, it's become less central. Ethan has fresh ideas. He's younger. He connects better with the clients. My business, our business, the one I started from nothing. She was using management jargon on me. Less central. It was a euphemism. It felt like they were handing me a pink slip for my own life. I looked at Ethan, who was leaning against the doorway, smirking, not trying to hide his satisfaction. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my replacement. I started noticing things. Small, unsettling shifts. My favorite armchair moved. My morning coffee, always perfect, was now lukewarm and slightly bitter. My calendar appointments were being overridden by Ethan's. It was a subtle, psychological erosion. They weren't fighting me. They were just quietly removing my footprint. One afternoon, I found a stack of papers tucked away in Sarah's home office drawer. They were financial documents, not business ones, but personal asset valuations. My life insurance policy reviewed and updated. But what stopped my heart was the signature line at the bottom. It wasn't just a review. It was an amendment, a crucial one. I couldn't make out the details before the door clicked behind me. Mark, what are you doing in here? Sarah's voice was sharp, right behind me. I felt the weight of a secret I wasn't supposed to know. A secret that smelled like danger. What had she changed on that policy? And why was her look not one of surprise but of calculation? The suddenness of Sarah's presence in the doorway paralyzed me. My mind raced, trying to invent a plausible reason for rummaging through her private documents. I quickly slipped the papers back into the drawer, but the image of that altered life insurance form was burned into my memory. I stammered, just looking for a pen. Sarah. Thought I left one in here earlier. She didn't move. Her eyes, usually warm and welcoming, were flat, devoid of emotion. My office is not a supply closet, Mark. You know that. Her tone was low and measured, far more unnerving than a shout would have been. I need those files put away immediately. They are private. I mumbled an apology and retreated, but the encounter had confirmed my fear. She was hiding something important, something that involved my finances and, quite possibly, my future. The suspicion that had been a faint background noise was now screaming in my ears. I felt a cold, deep sense of isolation. The next few days were a psychological minefield. My family, Sarah and Ethan, communicated in hushed tones, stopping abruptly whenever I entered the room. It was the whisper campaign. Every shared look, every short silence, felt like a deliberate exclusion. I tried to push back against it. I tried to reconnect. I approached Sarah that weekend with a plan for a romantic dinner, a chance to talk honestly, to break through the walls she had built. This was my attempt at false hope, grasping for the familiar comfort of our old life. Sarah, let's go out tonight? Just us. We haven't had a real conversation in weeks, I suggested, trying to sound casual and inviting. She paused, looking irritated rather than pleased. Tonight, I can't, Mark. I promised Ethan I'd go over some investment options with him. It's crucial for his new venture. My heart sank. Ethan again. My date night had been sacrificed for my brother's business consultation. His new venture? That venture he's running out of my home office? I asked, the bitterness seeping into my voice. Sarah sighed, clearly annoyed by my reaction. Don't be like this, Mark. It's important. You wouldn't understand the technical side anyway. We need to support him. That phrase, you wouldn't understand, became the mantra of my disposability. It was a subtle, constant dismissal. They were treating me like a senile relative, kindly tolerated but incapable of contributing. Later that week, Ethan made a move. He brought a massive, expensive new desk into the living room, setting it up right near the main entrance. When I asked him about it, he just smiled that unsettling, confident smile. Needed a better command center. Mark, Sarah and I are really ramping up the business strategy. This location is key for logistics and client flow, he said, emphasizing Sarah and I. The audacity was staggering. He was carving out his own physical space in my home, transforming my shared living room into his personal headquarters. It felt like a territorial marking, a clear sign that I was losing ground rapidly. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was slipping through my fingers. I called my lawyer, a longtime friend named David, and asked him to discreetly look into my personal finances and property deeds, specifically asking about any recent changes or amendments to my insurance or will. I needed solid proof, not just terrifying conjecture. I waited for David's call, the silence in the house feeling heavy and suffocating. The air was thick with unspoken plots. I looked at the new desk, Ethan's desk, and felt a surge of cold dread mixed with burning anger. How far had this betrayal gone? The wait for David's call was excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped, anticipating the confirmation of my worst fears. The atmosphere in the house had turned brittle. Sarah was distant, Ethan was openly dismissive, and I felt like a stranger residing in a meticulously planned museum of my own former life. The conflict escalated during a mundane family dinner. I tried one last time to assert my authority, to remind them who owned the ground they stood on. Ethan, I started, trying to keep my voice even. That desk you moved into the living room needs to go. This is a home, not an office extension. You can use the basement. Ethan stopped chewing, his eyes locking onto mine with an unsettling lack of respect. The basement. Mark, we need access. Sarah agrees. We can't run a major operation out of a dusty cellar. A major operation, I repeated, my patience finally snapping. This isn't Amazon headquarters. Ethan, it's my house. Sarah intervened instantly, her voice dripping with disappointment aimed squarely at me. Don't raise your voice, Mark. Ethan is right. The flow is better here. And frankly, your shouting is disruptive. We are trying to grow things, but you're only creating obstacles. Her defense of him, her immediate alignment against me, felt like a physical blow. I pushed my plate away. Grow things? You're growing a wedge between me and my own family. Ethan simply chuckled, a low, arrogant sound. Relax, Mark. We're simply adapting. The world changes, and sometimes those who can't keep up get left behind. The implication was clear, painful, and deeply insulting. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer, realizing the verbal conflict was futile. They had already decided the outcome. The next morning, David finally called. I took the call in my car, needing complete privacy. His voice was grim, professional, but laced with a genuine sadness that chilled me to the bone. Mark, I looked at the property deeds and the estate documents. As you ask, David began, the house title is clean, still solely in your name, but the business, that's different. About 6 weeks ago, you signed a document transferring 49% of the company ownership to Sarah and granting Ethan a controlling interest in all management decisions. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I never signed that. I'd remember giving away control of my life's work. That's the unsettling part, Mark, David continued, his voice dropping further. The signature looks like yours. It's highly convincing. And the transfer was done using a notarized power of attorney that you supposedly executed 4 months ago, giving Sarah sweeping authority over your business assets. A power of attorney? I vaguely remembered signing a stack of routine renewal documents Sarah had placed in front of me during a very busy week. I hadn't read every single line. I had trusted her. Then he delivered the final, devastating piece of information about the life insurance. And yes, the policy was amended. Sarah is now the sole primary beneficiary, and the accidental death clause was significantly increased a month ago. Accidental death? The words echoed in the small space of the car, cold and heavy. This wasn't just about money or business anymore. This felt like planning. A dangerous, calculated strategy that saw me not as a husband, but as an asset to be liquidated. I felt a sudden, terrifying rush of fear. They had systematically stripped away my professional power, used my trust to gain legal control, and made my sudden absence financially rewarding. I hung up, the phone slipping from my sweaty hand. My mind was reeling. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had legally cornered me. The fight had moved beyond arguments over a desk. It was now a fight for my very survival. I had to find out how they pulled off that signature and that power of attorney. They had to have left a trace. I drove aimlessly for hours after David's call, the cold, hard facts slamming into me like physical blows. A transfer of power, forged signatures, and a massive increase in the accidental death payout. This wasn't family friction. It was an organized campaign. My wife and my brother were working together, and I was the obstacle they planned to remove. The fear had turned into a burning, focused rage. I realized I couldn't confront them. If I showed my hand, if they knew I had contacted a lawyer and learned about the insurance amendment, they would accelerate their timeline. I had to become the invisible man they already thought I was, watching and listening, waiting for my moment to gather indisputable proof. That night, I returned home, playing the role of the defeated, oblivious husband. I was quiet, withdrawn, and pretended to be consumed by stress from the business, just as they expected. Sarah offered me a cup of herbal tea, her expression one of forced concern. I accepted it, my hand shaking slightly. I took a few sips, and then, when her back was turned, I poured the rest into a potted plant. I couldn't trust anything they offered me now. My focus shifted entirely to the forged power of attorney. I knew Sarah kept a meticulously organized filing system in her office. I needed access to the files she thought were secure. I waited until 2 a.m., the hour when the house truly settled into silence. The silence felt heavy, pressurized, ready to break. Ethan was in the guest room, and Sarah was asleep in our bed, or so I hoped. Moving with the stealth I hadn't realized I possessed, I slipped into Sarah's office. I used a small, focused flashlight, shielding the beam with my hand. I went straight to the locked file cabinet. I remembered seeing Sarah input the combination many times. A sequence of birthdays, a code I should have seen as sentimental but now recognized as a vulnerability. The cabinet clicked open. My hands were clammy as I sifted through the business documents, ignoring the noise of the rustling paper. Then I found it. A thin manila folder labeled estate. Inside, the paperwork detailed the full extent of their betrayal, not just the controlling interest given to Ethan, but a series of financial maneuvers that had been systematically draining the company's liquid assets into a separate shell corporation managed solely by Ethan. But the most damning evidence wasn't the fraud. It was a receipt for a specialized notary service wand that operated late hours and promised discreet document authentication. Tucked inside the receipt was a photograph, a small, blurry photo, clearly taken from a security camera feed. The photograph showed Sarah and Ethan together in the notary's cramped office. They weren't just signing documents. They were leaning over a table, and in the center of the table was a high-tech scanner and a stack of papers, among them a pristine copy of my signature. It was clear they hadn't just used the power of attorney. They had systematically counterfeited my signature using a digital process to make the transfer documents look flawless. This was not a quick oversight. It was premeditated fraud. A wave of nausea washed over me. Seeing them smiling together in that clandestine moment, they, two people I loved and trusted most in the world, confirmed the full scope of the conspiracy. They had systematically stolen my business, my identity, and were now planning to steal my life for a payout. I quickly took photos of the documents, the notary receipt, and the damning photograph using my phone, then secured the folder exactly as I found it. I crept back to the bedroom, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had the proof, but now they knew I was a problem, and if they sensed I knew the truth, the danger would become immediate and lethal. I had to disappear, but not physically. I had to become truly invisible to them while I prepared my countermove. The discovery of the evidence in Sarah's office didn't just confirm my suspicions, it redefined the battlefield. I was living with two calculated predators. Their operation was professional, their deception complete. I couldn't trust the air I breathed, the food I ate, or the sleep I allowed myself. My immediate goal was survival and strategic withdrawal, not confrontation. I had to make them believe their plan was succeeding while I built my counterattack. The first step was to establish a secure line of communication and a safe storage place for the evidence. I immediately sent the photographic evidence to David, my lawyer, using a secure, anonymous email address I hadn't used in years. I told him only that I had found critical information and that my life was potentially at risk, instructing him to safeguard the files and wait for my next contact. Then came the performance. The vanishing act. I had to look utterly defeated. The next morning, I allowed myself to look haggard and broken. I approached Sarah, slumped in my shoulders, my voice hollow. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," I told her, making sure Ethan was within earshot, lingering near his new, usurping desk. The business, the stress, everything. I'm burnt out, you and Ethan. You clearly have the energy and the vision. Maybe you're right. Maybe my time is done. I spoke the words they wanted to hear, handing them the victory they had schemed for. I saw a fleeting look of triumph pass between them, quickly masked by Sarah's expertly crafted sympathy. "Oh, Mark, I know this is hard," she said, her voice soft, manipulative. She reached out to touch my arm, and I had to fight the instinct to recoil. "But we're a family. We'll take care of you. Just step back, relax, let Ethan handle the heavy lifting." Ethan stepped forward, radiating false magnanimity. "It's for the best. Mark, you've earned a rest. We'll make sure your legacy is secure." I nodded slowly, letting the implied disaster, the complete loss of my identity, and purpose settle heavily in the room. I spent the next few days playing the part of a man in decline. I stayed silent during meals, took long, purposeless drives, and made sure to look preoccupied and ineffective. I avoided all conversation about the business or the family future. This allowed me to observe them. They became careless in their confidence. Their whispers turned into casual conversations. Their secret meetings moved from hushed phone calls to open video conferences in the office. They were sure they had neutralized me. One evening, I overheard Ethan bragging to a client about a major deal he was closing, a deal I knew from my time going through the files. was financially risky and possibly unethical. He was moving fast, desperate to prove his dominance, using my company's established goodwill as his shield. I realized their reckless ambition could be my greatest weapon. They were so focused on the prize, they had dropped their guard against me. I started a detailed ledger documenting every risky business move, every unauthorized expense, and every questionable decision Ethan made. I wasn't just collecting proof of their fraud against me, I was collecting evidence of their mismanagement and malfeasance against the company itself. I had to hit them where they lived, their greed. But first, I needed a base of operations outside the house, somewhere they could never find me. A silent, external sanctuary. My need for a secure external base of operations was critical. I couldn't risk conducting my revenge planning under their roof. My family, now my adversaries, believed I was wandering around in a defeated haze, providing me with the perfect cover. I remembered an old, forgotten apartment building downtown that my company had owned years ago, used only for temporary client housing during long contracts. It was structurally sound, still technically under my name in an old ledger, and, crucially, completely unknown to Sarah and Ethan. It was remote, dusty, and perfectly hidden. I spent a day making it habitable, cleaning, setting up a secure computer connection, and bringing only the bare necessities. This isolated space, far from the suffocating pressure of my home, became my sanctuary and my war room. Mark, the defeated husband, was gone. Mark, the architect of ruin, had emerged. The strong twist came when I started organizing the business evidence. I had the files detailing Ethan's reckless spending and fraudulent asset transfers, but I needed a way to prove that the original power of attorney, the document that gave Sarah control, was signed under duress or deception, not just forged later. I recalled the day Sarah presented me with the stack of papers to sign. It was late, I was exhausted from a massive client negotiation, and she had placed them specifically after giving me a drink of strong herbal tonic she claimed helped me relax after a stressful day. I had dismissed the taste as odd, but accepted the fatigue that followed as simple exhaustion. Now, sitting in the silence of the empty apartment, a terrifying possibility occurred to me. I hadn't just been tired. I returned to my primary home under the guise of collecting some personal items. I went to the kitchen and retrieved the tall, ceramic mug I always used for those late-night tonics. I packaged it carefully, wrapped in a sealed plastic bag, and drove it directly to a private, highly discreet lab specializing in toxicology, far outside the city. I paid cash and gave a false name, requesting a full screening for common sedative and psychotropic substances. It was a desperate long shot, born of mounting paranoia, but the atmosphere of constant deception had made me distrust every interaction. A week later, the lab results came back. The report was concise and chilling. Trace amounts of a powerful, fast-acting sedative, often used to induce relaxation and short-term memory impairment, were detected in the ceramic glaze of the mug. Not enough to knock someone out, but enough to severely impair judgment and focus. My blood ran cold. The power of attorney hadn't been signed on a day of forgetfulness or trust. It had been signed under the chemical influence of a carefully administered sedative, expertly dosed by my own wife. The realization was physically sickening. This wasn't just corporate fraud and abandonment. It was chemical manipulation and a calculated plot to render me mentally incapacitated at a crucial moment. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a psychological assault. They had deliberately weakened my mind to steal my control. The anger I felt now was purified. It was cold, sharp, and focused entirely on justice. They had underestimated me, assuming I would simply crumble. They were wrong. I had the ledger, the forged signature proof, and now the toxicology report proving premeditation. The revenge plan could now officially begin. Armed with the toxicology report, the forged documents, and David's confirmation that the evidence was securely held, I transitioned from observer to active planner. The feeling of being drugged and manipulated stoked a terrifying, controlled fury. They had tried to erase me, But in doing so, they had given me a singular, powerful purpose: justice. My safe house became the command center for the gathering storm. The first step of the revenge plan required professional subtlety. I couldn't just walk into a police station with accusations. They needed to be boxed in legally and financially first. I contacted David again, instructing him to initiate 2 distinct legal actions simultaneously. First, a highly detailed internal audit request for the business, citing anomalies in quarterly reporting and unauthorized asset restructuring. This would legally freeze Ethan's ability to move large sums of money immediately and force their accounting team to open their books. Second, a confidential motion to review the validity of the 4-month-old power of attorney, noting a lapse of judgment due to extreme stress when it was signed. David, sworn to secrecy regarding the toxicology report for now, agreed to file both motions quietly and quickly. While the legal nets were being cast, I focused on the business side. Ethan, bloated with false power, was making moves I knew would crumble the company. I tracked a massive, ill-advised property acquisition he was finalizing, one that relied heavily on our company's reputation, and a massive, short-term bank loan. This was his fatal flaw: greed over caution. I used my old, forgotten contacts in the industry, people who had respected me and now saw my former company being run by a reckless newcomer. I didn't accuse Ethan directly. Instead, I carefully leaked information about the internal audit and the looming legal review of the company's controlling documents. I implied that the new management was financially unstable and potentially illegitimate. The impact was immediate and devastating. Whispers of instability spread through the financial community like wildfire. The major bank that was supposed to underwrite Ethan's enormous property loan paused the transaction. They demanded immediate, exhaustive documentation proving the validity of the new management structure, the very documents I knew were fraudulent. At home, the atmosphere shifted again. Sarah and Ethan, who had been smug and triumphant, became frantic. I watched them argue in hushed, panicked tones. Ethan's swagger was replaced by a look of sheer terror. His biggest deal was collapsing, and the bank was demanding answers that would expose their fraudulent power transfer. I still maintained my persona as the defeated, passive husband, quietly observing the chaos I had unleashed. Sarah even approached me, her desperation thinly veiled. "Mark, the bank is asking difficult questions about the business structure. Did you mention anything to anyone?" she asked, her eyes sharp with suspicion. I looked at her, maintaining an expression of simple bewilderment. "Me? No, Sarah. I've been resting, remember? You two are running things now. Maybe Ethan shouldn't have taken such a huge risk so fast." My calm deflection infuriated her, but she couldn't prove I had done anything. I had used their own legal fraud and Ethan's hubris as the weapon. The confrontation was coming, fueled by their fear of being exposed, and I was ready for it. The legal and financial pressure I exerted had pushed Sarah and Ethan to the brink. They were like cornered animals, dangerous and unpredictable, but also making critical mistakes. The collapse of the bank deal due to structural instability concerns had cost them millions in non-refundable fees. Hitting Ethan's ego and Sarah's carefully constructed confidence hard, the confrontation I had been preparing for finally arrived late one evening. I was reading quietly in the den, pretending to ignore the low, furious argument that had been simmering between them for hours. Suddenly, the door burst open. Sarah stood there, her face white with rage, Ethan hovering nervously behind her. Her composure had finally shattered. "Stop playing this game, Mark," she hissed, throwing a tablet onto the table near me. It was showing a legal filing David had initiated, the one questioning the validity of the power of attorney. "What is this? Are you actively trying to ruin us?" I picked up the tablet, examining the filing calmly, a mask of feigned ignorance firmly in place. "Ruin you, Sarah? Why would I do that? I'm just trying to understand the sudden financial instability in the company I spent 20 years building. Instability you created," Ethan shouted, stepping out from behind Sarah. He was shaking, the facade of smooth confidence entirely gone. You called David. You poisoned the well. The bank deal is dead because of you. I set the tablet down and finally dropped the pretense of being the defeated victim. My voice was low, steady, and infinitely cold. The contrast to their hysteria was palpable. No, Ethan, I corrected him. The deal is dead because you tried to finance a reckless acquisition with a company you don't actually own. Using management rights you obtained through fraud, I didn't create the instability. I simply exposed the instability you created when you tried to steal my business. The word fraud hit them both hard. Sarah looked momentarily stunned. She recovered quickly, her expression twisting into desperate contempt. Fraud? We were restructuring. You were useless, Mark. The company was stagnating. We did what was necessary to save it, she spat out, the old resentments finally boiling over. You were holding us back. We didn't need you anymore. And the life insurance amendment, Sarah? I asked, leaning forward, focusing entirely on her. My tone never wavered. Was that also necessary to save the company? Or was that just necessary to ensure your retirement fund after my accidental departure? The color drained completely from her face. She stumbled back a step, glancing wildly at Ethan. I had mentioned the one thing they thought was an absolute secret, the silent endgame they had planned. Ethan, seeing her panic, lashed out in a final, desperate attempt at dominance. You can't prove anything. We are legally in control. You signed the papers? Did I, Ethan? I challenged him. Did I sign them with a clear, conscious mind? Or was my judgment impaired by the sedative I found traces of in my favorite mug? The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with shattered lies. Sarah's eyes were wide, reflecting pure, terrifying fear. She knew I had the toxicology report. She knew I had them trapped. The game was over. The silence after my revelation, the mention of the sedative and the mug, was deafening. It wasn't just shock. It was the realization that their meticulously constructed scheme had been dismantled by the man they considered an easy victim. Their betrayal had crossed the line into potentially criminal territory, and I had the evidence. Sarah was the first to regain a semblance of control, fueled by pure, desperate anger. You investigated me. You went through my things, after everything I gave up for you, Mark. This is pathetic. Her defense wasn't denial of the act, but an attack on my character for uncovering it. Ethan, however, was in full panic mode. He knew the legal weight of what I had just revealed. We need to talk to David immediately. We can fix this. It was a misunderstanding, Mark. Just poor communication. He pleaded, his voice high and frantic. I stood up slowly, facing them both. The time for whispering and hinting was over. This was the launch of the final phase of my revenge plan, designed not just to take back what was mine, but to expose their true selves to the world they cared about most, the business community. There is no fixing this, Ethan, I stated, my eyes steady. And there is certainly no misunderstanding. I have the evidence of the fraudulent asset transfer, the forged signatures, the notary receipt, and the toxicology report proving premeditation. You didn't just try to steal my business, you tried to incapacitate me to do it. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen, the photo of Sarah and Ethan smiling in the notary's office. Their expressions, watching that image, were a twisted mirror of their own betrayal. The internal audit is already underway, I continued, pressing my advantage. The bank is asking for proof of management authority, which you can't provide without exposing the fraud. The clock has run out. Sarah's fear finally gave way to vicious cunning. If you try to expose us, we'll tell everyone you've been unstable, that you're an alcoholic, that you're mentally unfit. We can destroy your reputation, Mark. Even if we lose the business. I nodded slowly, acknowledging her threat, but completely unmoved. You can try, Sarah, but I have already taken steps to ensure your reputation is the one that crumbles first. Because unlike you, my evidence is factual, notarized, and scientifically proven. The core of my revenge wasn't just legal. It was psychological. I knew they valued public image and financial standing above all else. Destroying their financial empire would be painful, but destroying their status would be crippling. I revealed the final, devastating move. In 2 days, the full details of the financial malfeasance and the questionable power of attorney will be filed not just with the court, but also discreetly with the relevant professional licensing boards and key industry media outlets. Highlighting a pattern of fraudulent practices by Ethan, the business will collapse, and Ethan's career will be over before it begins. Sarah, the details regarding the insurance amendment and the sedatives will go to a family court specialist. I want every single asset protected, and I want you out of my life permanently. Their faces were a study in utter devastation. The fear was now existential. Ethan stumbled back, clutching the wall, realizing the scale of the ruin. Sarah just stared at me, the disbelief in her eyes hardening into pure, cold hatred. I had not only survived their plan, I had weaponized it against them. The air in the house was thick and toxic after the confrontation. Sarah and Ethan didn't attempt to fight back physically, but the atmosphere was heavy with their despair and rage. They knew the jig was up. Their empire of lies was crumbling, and I was the one holding the hammer. The next 2 days were surreal. I maintained a clinical distance, sleeping in the guest room and avoiding all contact. They were too preoccupied, scrambling to save what little they could to pay much attention to me. They were frantically consulting their own lawyers, only to be met with the grim reality that David's initial filings had already frozen the most critical assets and validated the internal audit. The official notification of the legal actions arrived on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't just a letter. It was a cascade of devastating professional consequences. The industry media, alerted by my subtle, targeted leaks, published a cautious but highly damaging piece hinting at severe internal instability and questionable practices by the new, younger management. The business world moves on reputation, and theirs was now utterly compromised. Ethan, the supposed golden boy, was the hardest hit. The professional licensing board immediately opened an inquiry based on the evidence of fraudulent document transfers. He was effectively blacklisted overnight. I watched him through the kitchen window, sitting alone at his imposing new desk, his head buried in his hands. The grand command center he had established in my living room had become his personal cage of ruin. Sarah's reaction was more calculated. She tried one last emotional plea, cornering me in the hallway. "Mark, please. We were wrong. We were just scared of getting old and losing everything," she whispered, tears in her eyes, the same manipulative tears she'd used for years to get her way. "We're still married. We can fix this. Don't throw away 2 decades of marriage over a mistake." I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I didn't see my wife. I saw a stranger, a highly skilled actress, trying to save herself. "A mistake, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "Did you make a mistake when you chose to alter my life insurance policy? Was it a mistake to slip sedatives into my tea so I would sign over my life's work? That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. A premeditated, dangerous choice. You made your bed when you decided my absence was more valuable than my presence." I showed her the sealed envelope I was holding. "This is the separation petition, based on your financial fraud and the proven acts of chemical manipulation. You will be served tomorrow. You have 24 hours to collect your personal belongings and vacate this house, or the court will force your removal." Her face hardened, the mask of sadness dropping entirely, replaced by pure venom. "You'll regret this, Mark. You will be alone." "I was already alone, Sarah," I replied, walking past her. "But now I will be safe." The full, satisfying weight of the aftermath was just beginning. I had secured my life and my assets, and their professional lives were in ruins. But the emotional toll, the 20 years of love and trust I had invested, was still an open wound. I knew I had to face the deeper sadness now that the fight was over. The physical distance was established, but the emotional separation was the final, hardest step. The day Sarah and Ethan left was quiet, almost anticlimactic. they didn't go gracefully. A hired moving crew packed their belongings, and both of them avoided looking at me, maintaining a cold, defeated silence. Ethan took his monstrous desk, the symbol of his short, ruinous reign, leaving an ugly scuff mark on the hardwood floor, a final petty act of spite. When the last van pulled away, I walked through the house, breathing the air deep into my lungs. It was an overwhelming mix of relief and profound emptiness. The oppressive weight of their conspiracy was gone, but so was the illusion of my family life. The house felt like a mausoleum of memories. I went into Sarah's former office and found a hastily cleaned out space, but in the back of a drawer, she had left one item, a small, framed photograph from our wedding day. We were smiling, genuinely happy, oblivious to the decades of resentment that would eventually calcify into betrayal. Seeing that photo brought a wave of crushing sadness that was far more painful than the anger I had felt during the confrontation. The anger was a shield. The sadness was the truth. I hadn't just defeated two adversaries. I had lost my life partner and my brother. They were gone because they had chosen greed over loyalty, but the wreckage was still mine to navigate. My lawyer, David, called later that day to confirm the logistics were clean. The emergency injunction had been filed, protecting the business assets from further draining, and the divorce proceedings were officially underway. The legal victory was complete, swift, and absolute. "You did well, Mark," David said, his voice reassuring. "You handled a truly toxic situation with incredible strength. Now, you need to focus on healing." "Healing," I repeated, looking at the scuff mark Ethan left on the floor. "It feels like rebuilding a life from a pile of ashes, David." The following weeks were dedicated to the business. I returned to the company headquarters, which felt equally empty. I spent hours undoing Ethan's reckless contracts, stabilizing our finances, and reassuring clients who had been scared off by the bad press. It was a grueling process, but every salvaged contract, every restored client relationship felt like a small, satisfying step toward reclaiming my professional soul. I discovered the true depth of Ethan's negligence. He had been so focused on quick, showy wins that he had ignored essential maintenance, failing to renew critical software licenses and neglecting important regulatory deadlines. His ambition was a destructive force, one that nearly capsized the company I had spent my lifetime building. My initial goal of revenge slowly morphed into a mission of restoration. The greatest difficulty was dealing with our son. He was away at university, and I had been honest with him, telling him only that Sarah and Ethan had committed financial fraud against me, and that the marriage was over. I spared him the details about the sedatives and the insurance, wanting to protect him from the full darkness of his mother's actions. But the separation was still agonizing for him, and he blamed me for breaking the family apart. His silence, his distant texts, became the final, painful, collateral damage of their actions. I knew the revenge was necessary, and the satisfaction of victory was real. But the heavy emotional punch was still waiting for me in the quiet moments of the empty house. I was safe, I was rich, and I was utterly alone. The victory was undeniable, but the relief was temporary. The true aftermath wasn't the legal battle or the financial recovery. It was the unseen emotional cost. The house was clean of their presence. The business was stable. Yet I felt a deeper weariness than I had during the height of the conflict. The void Sarah and Ethan left behind was immense, echoing with the silence of lost trust. The deepest cut, the final emotional punch that lingered, was the relationship with my son. He was distant, processing the trauma of his parents split through the lens of blame. He couldn't reconcile the rock of his father with the aggressor who had filed for divorce. I had tried to shield him, but shielding him from the full truth meant bearing his resentment alone. I drove up to his university one weekend, hoping a face-to-face conversation could mend some of the damage. I found him withdrawn, guarded. "Dad, why couldn't you just let them have the business?" he asked, his voice raw with frustration. "You have enough money. Now the family is ruined. Mom is miserable, and Ethan is facing serious legal trouble. Was it worth it? His question hit me hard. He saw the consequences, but not the cause. He didn't know about the life insurance or the sedatives. He saw a ruthless man demanding what was legally his, not a desperate man fighting for his survival. It wasn't about the money, son, I explained, choosing my words carefully. It was about the line they crossed. It was about trust, integrity, and safety. When people you love try to systematically erase you, you have to fight back, not just for assets, but for your right to exist. He shook his head, looking away. It just sounds like revenge, Dad. That conversation underscored the profound, unseen costs of my fight. I had protected him from the horror of his mother's intent, but in doing so, I had alienated him. The thought that my son viewed me as the architect of the family's destruction, not the victim of betrayal, was crushing. At work, the restoration continued. I discovered a small local charity Ethan had been using as a front. He was diverting small amounts of company funds to it, not to help the needy, but to gain favor with a major local politician. I realized that while my revenge had satisfied my need for justice, it hadn't fully exposed the extent of their cynical exploitation of others. My fight had been internal, but their corruption had spread outwards. I decided that reclaiming my name and the integrity of the company required more than just legal action. It needed a public demonstration of my commitment to principle. I quietly began investing substantial personal funds into legitimate community initiatives. Using the business's name to restore the reputation Ethan had nearly destroyed. This wasn't revenge, it was redemption. Despite these efforts, the solitude of the empty house still pressed in on me every night. I found myself obsessing over the small details of the betrayal, the lukewarm coffee, the casual dismissal. The psychological scars were deep, forcing me to wonder if I could ever truly trust anyone again. I had won the war, but I was struggling to win the peace. The silence of the house forced me to confront the necessity of moving forward. I couldn't dwell in the empty rooms, reliving the ghosts of betrayal. My focus shifted entirely from revenge to restoration, not just of the company, but of my own sense of purpose. This phase became my quiet redemption. The business recovery was steady and deliberate. I took a hard look at the toxic atmosphere Ethan had created. I realized he hadn't just undermined me. He had instilled a culture of fear and cutting corners among the employees. My first major act was to introduce total transparency, holding all-hands meetings where I openly discussed the recent management challenges and assured them that integrity was now the core of our operations. I didn't mention Sarah or Ethan by name, but the message was clear. The old ways of deception were over. I followed through on the community initiatives, established a foundation using a substantial portion of the money I had clawed back from Ethan's fraudulent accounts. This wasn't merely a tax write-off or PR move. It was a way to convert the toxic product of their greed into something genuinely beneficial. I focused on supporting technical training programs for young people, as stark contrast to Ethan's superficial, name-dropping charity front. The impact was slow but meaningful. The press began to shift their tone, reporting less on the scandal and more on the company's robust turnaround and community commitment. My reputation, which Sarah had threatened to destroy, was rebuilding itself through actions, not words. However, the internal reconstruction remained the hardest part. My son was still my greatest source of pain. I continued to send him supportive texts and make weekly calls, never pressuring him, just consistently showing up. Understood his need to process his hurt, and I decided that the ultimate act of love was to give him the space to eventually see the truth for himself. One evening, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Martha, Sarah's older sister. Martha had always been fiercely loyal to Sarah, and I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce proceedings began. Her presence on my doorstep felt like a final skirmish. She looked tired, her usual sharp demeanor replaced by a deep sadness. "I just wanted to see you, Mark," she said quietly, stepping inside. I wanted to understand. I didn't offer excuses. I simply told her the truth, calmly laying out the timeline. The forged documents, the asset stripping, the increase in the accidental death clause, and the toxicology report. I showed her the physical evidence I still kept locked away. As she reviewed the details, her face crumpled. Martha had always believed in the sanctity of family, and seeing the proof of Sarah's cold-blooded planning was a devastating blow to her. She always had a darkness in her, Martha finally whispered, folding the papers slowly. But I never thought. Not like this. I believed her when she said you were having a breakdown. Martha's reaction, her genuine shock and dawning horror, was an unexpected validation. She saw the truth, not the narrative Sarah had spun. It was a small but crucial crack in the wall of isolation I had built. It proved that trust was possible again, even with those who had initially been against me. I was not alone in understanding the depth of the betrayal. Martha's visit marked a crucial turning point. Her acceptance of the truth, her admission that she had believed Sarah's lies, lifted an enormous emotional burden. It was the first time someone close to Sarah had genuinely acknowledged the extent of the malice I had endured. It allowed me to finally stop defending myself and focus entirely on healing. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for Ethan were finalizing. The investigation by the Professional Licensing Board concluded that his actions constituted gross professional misconduct and financial fraud. The final judgment stripped him of his licenses and imposed massive financial penalties, effectively making it impossible for him to ever work in the industry again. The final domino had fallen on his career. He was financially ruined and professionally exiled. Sarah, protected somewhat by the ongoing divorce proceedings, was shielded from immediate criminal charges related to the fraud, but her life was a different kind of wreckage. She was forced to sell assets to pay her rapidly escalating legal bills. Her social circle, once admiring, had cooled considerably following the persistent rumors of financial misconduct and the highly unusual details emerging from the divorce court. The unexpected strong twist came not from them, but from our old company's files. While reviewing archived documents related to Ethan's disastrous property acquisition, I discovered a hidden communication log. This log detailed Ethan's frantic, secret negotiations with a highly aggressive rival firm that had been trying to acquire my company for years. The shocking discovery was this: Ethan hadn't just been recklessly trying to expand the business. He had been actively planning to sell the entire stable portion of my company to the rival firm for pennies on the dollar. Immediately after using the fraudulent bank loan to acquire the risky property, the rival firm would absorb the good assets, leaving my company saddled with the toxic debt. This was far beyond mere self-enrichment. This was deliberate corporate sabotage, designed not just to benefit himself, but specifically to destroy my company's financial future while maximizing his quick payout. Sarah was a willing participant, focused on the insurance payout, but Ethan's hatred ran deeper. His motive wasn't just greed. It was absolute malice and a desire for total annihilation of my legacy. I realized then that my initial revenge, the legal freezing of assets, had done more than just save my fortune. It had preemptively stopped the catastrophic transfer that would have obliterated decades of my work and left hundreds of employees jobless. I hadn't just saved myself. I had saved the company from total, calculated destruction. This revelation changed everything. It transformed my feeling of personal satisfaction into a profound sense of responsibility and confirmed the life or death nature of the fight I had waged. It also gave me the final piece of leverage I needed, a way to show my son the true depths of Ethan's malevolence. I didn't immediately reveal the log. I knew my son was still hurting, and I had to choose the right moment for this final, devastating truth. The quiet redemption was working. The financial noise was fading. Now, the final, painful, emotional confrontation awaited. I carried the weight of the hidden communication log, the proof of Ethan's total annihilation plot, for several weeks. I knew its revelation would be agonizing for my son, but withholding it meant allowing him to continue believing I was the vindictive party. I had to choose between protecting him from temporary pain and allowing him to live with a fundamental misunderstanding of his family's history. I finally decided I couldn't rebuild a relationship based on a partial truth. I arranged a dinner with him in a quiet, neutral location. He arrived tense, still maintaining a respectful but wounded distance. We talked for a while about his studies and my company's recovery. I praised his hard work and told him how proud I was. I wanted him to feel secure and loved before I dropped the final, devastating truth. Son, I began, my voice steady, I know you've struggled to understand why I had to fight back so hard. You think I destroyed the family just to save money? He nodded slowly, not meeting my gaze. I just wish there had been another way, Dad. There wasn't, I said, pulling out a printout of the communication log, placing it gently between us. And I need you to understand why. I haven't told you everything, because I wanted to shield you from the darkness of their intentions. I then carefully walked him through the facts, starting with the life insurance policy amendment, the massive increase in the accidental death payout. I watched his face turn pale as he absorbed the true gravity of his mother's intent. That wasn't about greed for the company. That was about liquidating me for a quick payout, I explained softly. They weren't planning on me leaving. They were planning on my life ending prematurely and making it look like a tragic accident. Then, I focused on the communication log, detailing Ethan's final, catastrophic plan. I showed him the emails confirming that Ethan was planning to sell the functional half of the company to our biggest rival and leave the rest to employees. The legacy, the brand, to drown in debt. Ethan wasn't restructuring, son. He was planning to burn the whole thing down to spite me and make a quick, dirty fortune. If I hadn't moved when I did, the company would have been vaporized, and hundreds of people would have lost their livelihoods, all while they collected their insurance payout and walked away rich. He stared at the documents, his eyes wide and unfocused, the weight of the betrayal finally sinking in. The sight of his mother's name and his uncle's malicious intent laid bare was horrifying. His initial anger at me completely dissolved, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. He pushed the documents away, burying his face in his hands, letting out a choked, painful sound. They would have done that. They truly wanted that. They did, son, I confirmed, reaching across the table to touch his shoulder. They didn't see me as a father or a brother. They saw me as an obstacle to be removed. And I fought not out of revenge, but for survival, and for the integrity of everything I built. The final, crushing, emotional punch had landed. It wasn't the anger that broke him. It was the cold, undeniable proof of absolute betrayal from the two people he still held some hope for. The road to healing for both of us had just begun, but the truth, however painful, was finally out in the open. The dinner that night was the lowest point, but also the beginning of the real repair. My son's initial shock gave way to agonizing questions. Questions I answered with patient, brutal honesty. He wasn't just grieving the loss of his family structure. He was mourning the false image of his mother and uncle he had carried for 20 years. How could Mom look at me every day and still plan that? He asked, his voice raw. I don't know, son, I admitted truthfully. I don't think they saw the people around them anymore. They only saw what they wanted: money and control. That kind of greed blinds you to everything else. We stayed for hours, talking through the details, not just of the fraud, but of the emotional toll it had taken on me. I let him see the vulnerability beneath the armor of the victorious businessman. By the time we left the restaurant, the heavy wall between us was gone. He looked at me with sorrow, yes, but also with deep respect and understanding. My son's reconciliation became the most satisfying part of the entire ordeal, far outweighing any legal or financial victory. He didn't just forgive me for fighting. He understood that fighting was the only way to save both the business and, potentially, my life. The next day, he called me. Dad, I want to come home for the weekend. I want to help you clean out the basement, and maybe we can start putting the house back together. That request was more valuable than all the assets I had recovered. It was an acknowledgement that I was still his family, and that he chose to stand with me. When he arrived, we spent the weekend systematically dismantling the remaining ghosts of Sarah and Ethan's presence. He helped me remove the last of the business clutter, creating space for our future. Meanwhile, the consequences for Sarah were reaching their peak. She was forced to settle the divorce on my terms. Stripped of any claim to the company and the majority of our shared liquid assets due to the financial fraud evidence, she left the state to live with a distant relative, her reputation irreparably damaged. She was effectively isolated, a final, complete social and emotional exile. Ethan faced the severest consequences. With his professional licenses revoked and the weight of the financial penalties, he filed for bankruptcy. His grand plans for power and wealth had resulted in total financial and professional ruin. The last I heard, he was working menial jobs far away from the city, a harsh, fitting irony for a man who believed he was destined for corporate dominance. The quiet redemption was complete. The business was thriving, recognized now for its integrity. My relationship with my son was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of painful but honest truth. I finally felt safe again, not just physically, but psychologically. The pervasive fear and paranoia had receded. I was ready to close the chapter on betrayal and step into a future I had fought so hard to reclaim. I had been invisible, deemed unnecessary. But my one move, the decision to fight back, had not only saved me, but had cleared the path for a genuine, fulfilling life. The anger had faded, the sadness was healing, and only a deep, earned satisfaction remained. The months that followed the final legal settlements were dedicated to solidifying the rebirth. The house, once a prison of betrayal, was now a home again, filled with the warmth of honesty and mutual respect. My relationship with my son continued to deepen, built on the painful, shared understanding of what we had overcome. I had reclaimed the company, rebuilt its reputation, and most importantly, I had rebuilt myself. I was no longer the invisible man. I was the man who survived, thrived, and restored integrity. I decided to make one final, symbolic gesture to fully close the chapter. Ethan's old, massive desk had left a deep, ugly scuff mark on the original hardwood floor of the living room, a reminder of the arrogance and destruction that had nearly consumed my life. I had originally planned to refinish the floor, erasing the mark completely. Instead, I chose a different path. I hired a skilled artisan. I asked him to carefully cut out the damaged section of the floor, the exact area where Ethan's desk had stood, but I didn't ask him to replace it with matching wood. I replaced the damaged square with a piece of dark, polished, granite cold, and hard. I then had a small, simple inscription engraved onto the granite surface. Trust, learned. This wasn't meant to be hidden. It was a visible reminder, a scar in the foundation of my home, serving as a permanent lesson. Every time I walked past it, I remembered the cost of blind trust, the necessity of vigilance, and the strength it took to fight back. It was a tangible monument to my resilience. The final emotional punch arrived one warm spring evening. My son was home from university for a visit. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, a simple, peaceful moment I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy in years. He turned to me, his expression earnest. Dad, I know you said you didn't do it for revenge, but for survival. But seeing them lose everything, seeing them truly face the consequences of what they tried to do, it feels like justice. It feels like the world balanced out. He paused, then added, I'm sorry I blamed you. Thank you for not letting them win. That was the moment the last sliver of pain lifted. It was a complete, unambiguous validation from the person who mattered most. The initial anger, the deep sadness, and the lingering fear were finally replaced by a profound, earned satisfaction. I had been told I wasn't needed, that I was redundant, that I could be erased for financial gain. But my single, desperate move, the decision to stop being a victim and become the architect of my own defense, had changed everything. I hadn't just saved my fortune, I had saved my life, my company, and my relationship with my son. I was needed, after all, and I proved it by fighting for my existence against the darkness of my own family. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the granite inscription. The rebirth was complete. I was marked the survivor, and my future was my own, built on a foundation stronger than ever before. Like the video, turn on notifications, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring even more powerful stories to life. Thanks for watching, and remember, every betrayal writes a story. Every story deserves justice.